The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Rona Palmer from eMate Enterprises, and thanks for joining us today for this month's Best Practices webinar. And with me on the line today, I'm very pleased to have a new guest speaker, Josh Rothenberg, who is a CMRP and reliability subject matter expert at Lifecycle Engineering. And he's going to be presenting today's topic, which is keys to success with root cause analysis. And a little background on Josh. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, and he's been a reliability engineer in a variety of industries over the past 12 years. His experience covers loss elimination, CMMS and EAM implementations, fixed and rotating equipment, logistics, planning and scheduling, and his specialty is fostering interpersonal relationships that foster growth and development of cross-functional teams. He is a reliability subject matter expert and a Six Sigma Black Belt, and he utilizes tools that he learned in tire manufacturing, specialty chemical, and the electronics industries to kind of facilitate change. He's also certified in change management methodology, so we're very pleased to have Josh with us today. Josh, are you with us on the line?
I sure am, Rona. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I know you're at a client site today, but everyone on the line with us appreciates you putting this material together. And we had quite a few people sign up, and while they're logging in, Josh, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why did you choose this particular topic, the people side of root cause analysis?
Sure. So oftentimes when visiting different client sites, we find that people focus on the fundamentals of root cause analysis. How do you put programs in place? How do you set up the appropriate triggers? What are the tools and techniques to manage an effective root cause analysis process? And all those things are important, but what is often overlooked is how the people side of things come into play, not just the management support in terms of resources, funding, and time, but also how do you get people on board, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. And I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items before we launch Josh's presentation. I have your phones on mute, and that's because we're recording today's session. And I had several people say they weren't able to attend live, but Josh has agreed to make the presentation available in PDF form to viewers, and we'll also share the link to the recording. But Josh will be here at the end of the presentation. He's agreed to stick around and answer your questions. So please feel free to type your questions at any time during today's session, and I'll be sure to read them to Josh, and he'll try his best to answer them. There's also a brief survey at the end of the presentation, and we very much like your feedback, so we appreciate if you can take a few minutes and give us feedback in the survey. But I think before I turn it over to Josh, I still see some more people logging in. I would like to launch a couple of instant polls. Here is one. The results of the polls are going to be anonymous, but we'd just like to know and share who's on the line with us today. Do we have maintenance technicians, maybe people from the maintenance team, management and supervisors, planners, schedulers, engineering, or maybe some others who are in different parts of the operation. So if you don't mind, I'm launching that poll. And I see we've got about 3/4 of the votes in, so let me give it a few more seconds here. Okay, almost all done, all in. Let's feel like an auctioneer here. Okay. All right, well, let me close that and share the results with you. So it looks like, well, we don't have any maintenance technicians today. About half of you are on maintenance supervisors or managers, 10% planner schedulers, 10% engineering, and 30% in operations. All right, and one more question that it's always good to know from a CMMS standpoint, who is on the line? Again, you're going to be anonymous, but do we have eMate users? Do you currently use another CMMS? or maybe you don't currently have a CMMS and you're just researching, and that helps Josh to know that in his presentation. So I see again we have about 3/4 of the votes in. Give you about 10 more seconds here. And we'll close out the poll. Okay, let me close it out and share it so everyone sees the same results. So about half the people, just over half, are eMate users. 15% have another CMMS, and 33% don't currently have a CMMS, but they're interested in learning more about root cause analysis. All right, so thanks so much for doing those polls. I think during Josh's presentation, we'll ask for some additional polls, but don't forget that you can type questions for Josh at any time during the presentation, and he'll answer them at the conclusion of his presentation. So right now, I'd like to turn this over to you, Josh.
Great, Rona. Thanks again. So before we get started, jumping into the subject matter, I'd like to also do another poll to figure out what industries that, our attendee list of 43 folks out there. Do you guys come from metals and mining, oil and gas, chemicals? So we'd like to do a poll to understand what that clientele base is, and then after this, one more poll, and then we'll get to jump into the subject matter.
Great. So here's the poll question, and if you want to type in your responses, and Josh is asking, are you in metals and mining, energy, utilities, oil and gas, perhaps in pharmaceuticals, food and beverage, or chemical processing, or some other industry? We can only ask 5, so I see we're getting a lot who are in other industries. All right, looks like the votes are in. Let me share the results. 3% metals and mining, 8% utilities or oil and gas, no one from pharmaceuticals, 29% from food and beverage or chemical processing, and then 61% are from some other industry. All right, back to your presentation, Josh.
Great, thank you, Rona. And the last poll is with regard to your RCA process. Do you have something formal in place? Is it informal, ad hoc, where we do occasional RCAs, or is it non-existent? So we just want to get a feel for what the experience level of our attendees and callers are today.
Okay, so here's your final poll question. Do you currently have an RCA program, and how formal is it? Either you don't have a program today, you have an ad hoc program, you have an informal program, or you have a very formal RCA program today, but you still would like to, we always like to learn more. All right, we've got about 3/4 of the votes in. Let me leave this open a couple more seconds. Okay. Well, still people voting. It's a popular question. All right, good. Let's share what we have here. 31% have no RCA program today, so they're interested perhaps in starting one. 15% say they have an ad hoc program and perform occasional RCAs. 36%, it's the largest response, has an informal problem-solving culture but no formal RCA process. And then 18% have a very formal, well-defined RCA process in place. So thank you, everyone, for participating in the polls, and back to you, Josh.
Thanks. And those numbers are in line with what we typically see in the workplace, that for the most part, about a third having a non-existent program, almost 20% having a formal RCA process with roles, responsibilities, and triggers defined. That's fantastic. And what we'll talk about for the rest of the morning is how to take a potentially informal and ad hoc or even a non-existent process and how to pick that up and move forward with it. And when we talk RCA, root cause analysis, it can be either proactive or reactive. The way I like to think about it is that RCA is the overall arching umbrella, that RCFA, root cause failure analysis, is a subset and a part of that. So if I have a pump failure or a transformer failure, I can then go conduct an RCFA to determine what the root cause was, develop some actions, corrective actions to remediate that cause, and then move forward and ensure my actions address the problem at hand. Whereas when we talk RCA, that's really the overarching umbrella. That means maybe I have a certain area of my facility where my mean time between failure for my pumps is on average 5 years. And that's a good number. It's an industry best practice. Anything over 5 to 8 years is pretty fantastic. So, I could conduct root cause analysis to understand why Area A is seeing a long life MTBF for my pumps, whereas maybe Area B does not. So a little bit of terminology there. And when we talk about failures, there's a few different levels that I want to assess first before we get into the people side, and to focus on why the people side is so important. So if we have an event, a transformer failure, a pump failure, and if that meets certain trigger criteria which we have in place, then I'm slated to do a root cause analysis. Fine. So then I gather a team, I go through my process, all those types of things. But the question that I get oftentimes from clients is, how do I know if and when I've reached the root cause? So if you look at level 3 there, that's the physical root cause. So if it's a pump failure, maybe I have a shaft shear and break. I can take that shaft and send it off for analysis. That's my physical failure. Maybe it's a bearing problem that I can do some oil analysis and understand. But if I address and put actions in place to address that bearing failure or addressed that shaft failure, that's a very limited level of analysis, a limited level of corrective action moving forward. That one action or two actions, let's say I put it on a vibration route or change my lubrication every so often, those types of things, that addresses that one small event, of the small window of failures for that one specific piece of equipment, but what it doesn't do is address the potential overarching human and latent roots that exist. And that dives deeper to our level 4 and level 5 issues. And when I talk about human roots, I say, so what are the behaviors that we as individuals do to allow those failures to happen? Maybe an operator didn't open the valve, so I calibrated the pump on a discharge side. Maybe I didn't follow the SOP properly, those types of things. And digging a little deeper, we get into latent roots. That gets into the more procedural areas. So when I talk latent roots, that really focuses on, well, maybe an SOP on the operation of that pump doesn't exist. So that's a systemic, site-wide, company-wide issue. Maybe my training is an issue, so if the physical root is an alignment problem, the human root is that the pump, the mechanics didn't align the pump properly. The latent root could then be that there's no formal training program in place because my training budget has been slashed because of a poor economy, focusing resources on other things, etc. So to be truly effective in our root cause analysis and root cause failure analysis problem solving, we really want to not just focus on the physical roots, which are important, but also to drive deeper on the human and latent roots. And that can be problematic at times because then you get into a lot of potential finger pointing, which is not the goal of any root cause analysis program. And it also gets at the, it strikes at the people side of things, on the change management side, and it focuses on what are the procedures and processes that we have in place to allow these things to happen. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with Deming's 14 points, and he has a famous quote out there that says 90% of the problems that we see are self-induced. They're management type problems. So when we talk about people and management styles, we need to talk about change and change management. So ProSci is a leader in providing research tools and data that enable organizations to manage the people side of change. And if you think of any initiative of having a project management aspect, a change management aspect, and a leadership aspect, the change management aspect is often overlooked. So ProSci every 2 years comes out with a new study, And the most recent 2012 publication came out from their 2011 study, and they said their top 6 reasons as far as contributors to overall success of any initiative are, 1 through 6, active and visible sponsorship from the executive level, frequent and open communication, a structured change management approach, which includes resources and funding, having our employees engaged, and having engagement and support from middle management. So we're going to spend the rest of the morning breaking down these 6 and talking about why they're so important in not only establishing but also sustaining a root cause analysis program. So the first one is active and visible executive sponsorship. So I'm sure we all have the experience of understanding if my CEO, if my plant manager doesn't think it's important, then my mid-managers won't think it's important, and why should anybody else? So if you look at the graph there, it's called the golden circle. It's from a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek, and he put out a book called It Starts With Why. And the lesson there is that it's important first to understand why before you move to the how and the what. So we're in business for a reason. We make chemicals, we make pharmaceuticals, we make food products. How we do that and what we do in order to make that happen is the how and the what, but it really needs to start with a place from why. So the executive sponsor is the person that is able to set that vision, set that path, and that trickles down throughout the organization in terms of what the vision is, what are the KPIs that we have in place, what is important to us. So for an RCA program to be successful, it really needs to have that executive sponsorship support and start with the why. So moving on, we need to have a frequent and open communication and also a structured approach to our RCA process. And a structured approach, there's a lot of problem-solving methodologies out there, whether it be Plan, Do, Checked Out, Act, which kind of comes from the Lean school, or the DMAIC process, which comes from the Six Sigma school. They're really all the same, and we'll talk about the DMAIC process next. But in terms of a structured approach, you need a DMAIC process, and you also have to have RCA triggers in place. And the goal with RCA triggers is that if you have a team, you can't perform an RCA on every single failure that you have, and you can't perform it on one failure a year. You have to have triggers in place that define when and how often you perform root cause failure analysis investigation and to what level, A, B, C levels, etc. And in terms of open communication, it's important that everyone knows from that executive sponsor on down to the factory or plant floor what's going on, where we are in terms of our investigation, in terms of our reporting structure, in terms of our action items being addressed. And a good way to do that is through A3 reporting, and we'll talk about that as well. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the DMAIC process, and that's, again, a Six Sigma tool, and it's an acronym. It defines, it stands for, define the process, measure what data you have in place, collect the data, analyze the data, perform the RCA, come up with a list of actions, improve the situation, and then control, right? So that final step, that control piece is very important. You need to make sure that the actions that you put in place did in fact eliminate and alleviate or mitigate the issue, and that they didn't cause any other issues that weren't evaluated up front. So again, that's the circle there, the DMAIC process. Here's a flow chart that defines some RCA triggers. And again, for each facility, it's very important that we don't have every single failure warrant in RCA or an RCFA. So there should be some limits, some threshold levels, if you will, that establish when and how often an RCA should be performed. And these are just examples. I'll go through them quickly. If you have an OSHA recordable injury, obviously our safety group needs to get involved to understand why, to mitigate those issues. If there's potentially an environmental release, maybe if our production targets aren't where they need to be, or if we lose a critical system, or if we have a excessive maintenance cost. We may have one failure, but it costs $200,000 and it warrants the resources and time to conduct an RCA or RCFA. Maybe if it's a repeat failure, maybe the one failure is only $2,000 every time it happens, but it happens to me once a month. That money adds up over time. That should be addressed as well. So again, so any one of these issues, it's going to be site or company specific, but there's just an idea to get you guys thinking about where our trigger limits should be set, and then if something meets that trigger threshold, then an RCA can then be conducted. And then off to the left there, we say, okay, so how do we perform an RCA? Assemble the team, form the RCA, prepare the report, put the action plan in place, and then measure and monitor the results, and then publish those results. And finally, we talk about A3 reporting in terms of how do we communicate. Again, those from the Six Sigma background are probably familiar with this. So it's all well and good to do a very thorough analysis, put together a 60, 80-page report about what happened and why, but the reality of today's business climate is most people will probably not spend the time in reading that report. So an A3 reporting makes graphically all of the content needed. If you will, it's an executive summary, and it focuses on what is the business case, why are we doing this RCA, what is the situation, what is the results of the analysis, what is our goal, what is our target condition, and then the improvement activities of how we're going to get there. And those improvement activities could be things like, update SOP, retrain people on alignment settings, install vibration monitoring. We have a schedule there. We have metrics in place to make sure that those actions get completed and that the results of those actions are the actions or are moving the needle in the right way. So that's our A3 reporting, which allows us to make sure that people on the floor are involved. So another important aspect of putting together a root cause analysis program is making sure that we have the dedicated resources and funding. From a change management perspective, as well as just a practical execution perspective, we need to have people that manage an RCA program, that are allowed to dig in the data, whether that be the reliability engineer, and figure out when our triggers are being, our trigger thresholds are being met, how we focus on those, how do we roll those up, are we ensuring that we're focusing on the largest issues for the site and not that little auxiliary pump that's failing in the corner. And again, so these are the people and the funding that allow for those mitigating actions to be executed, putting together business cases for those, A3 reporting, all those things. And when it comes to rolling things up to make funds available, all of those tools that we've discussed, whether it be A3 reporting in our business case, makes your manager's job much easier to go to the leadership team, executive leadership team, wherever it need be, to ask for money and resources. So that's important as well. So no initiative will be successful without the proper engagement and participation of the workforce. So how do we get people engaged, right? So there's, especially in today's business climate, everyone is being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. Everyone's busy, moving in 10 different directions. How do we have a formal process in place, and how do we make sure that people are managing that process? So if we're executing an RCA, we need to build the process as a team. If I come to your facility and say, here's my best practice RCA process, and hand it to you, and that becomes, company ABC's RCA process, there is no ownership there. So the process to be owned by the people involved that will be asked to utilize and execute the process needs to be developed by them. Best practices need to be understood, but it's very important that the process gets built by a cross-functional team. And again, thinking about it starts with why. We need to understand the why before we focus on the how and the what. So the why is the RCA program important? The how is how do we get there, and the what are the specific actions all of us are responsible to do in terms of roles and responsibilities to be able to execute and execute that process to mitigate whatever failures are out there. To get people involved, I always like to use a 5 why methodology that allows people on the plant floor, in the field, whether it be operators, mechanics, people at that front line to get involved, where if I have a pump failure, my operator doesn't press the call button and then go sit in the break room. He's out there with the mechanic, with the electrician, troubleshooting, right? And so that the expectation on site needs to be from supervisors on down that everyone has ownership in the equipment, in the problem-solving methodology, and I found that a 5Y methodology is a great way to instill that with your team. Again, having people involved and maintaining a visual factory, posting the A3s, having metrics in place, understanding what my output is in terms of files per hour or tons per day, whatever it may be, having that stuff visual. Again, a lean methodology, a lean focus on making sure people on the floor understand how we're doing today, how we did yesterday, and what the goals and expectations are for how we are expected to do tomorrow. That drives ownership and the right behaviors. The next, important people side of change, how we make sure that initiatives stay current and stay ongoing and sustainable, is we need engagement and support from our middle management. Again, so ProSci has found that the two most important people to hear things from are our executive sponsor, that plant manager, CEO type individual, and our direct boss. So the message that the plant manager needs to send is the vision, the alignment, the high-level goals. This is why an RCA program is important. And my direct boss needs to tell me on a day-to-day basis, these are the things I expect from you specifically. So one paints a vision, and the other one paints a very specific roles and expectations to let me know where I sit. So how do we do that? We need to understand and make our job and our boss's job defined, right, in terms of roles and responsibilities. So we have to first educate middle management on the importance of RCA. I know we have a lot of operations folks out there. If we have meeting requests to have an operator come to an RCA meeting, maybe that means that we have to figure out an overtime schedule to support the production run of that piece of equipment. But that operations supervisor, that operations manager needs to understand that allowing that operator free time to go attend that meeting allows him to participate in the process. It creates that ownership, and it drives us towards a viable, effective solution. And again, we have to share and communicate our wins throughout the facility, through A3 communications, through visual management boards, things of that nature. So just to close, our top 6 contributors to any initiative, specifically within the RCA initiative, is the first one is active and visible executive sponsorship. The second one is frequent and open communication. The third is a structured change management approach that includes resources and funding. We then have to have active employee engagement and participation, and engagement and support for middle management. So with that, there's my contact information there. Our website is www.lce.com. My email address is jrothenberg@lce.com, and feel free to send me an email. And again, as Rona mentioned, I'll make public the PDF slides for today's presentation, and we can also send you guys a single point lesson for RCA Triggers, RCA Tool guide, which gets into more of the how and the what in terms of what RCA tools will be effective in what situation. And if you just have any general questions or comments that aren't covered today in the Q&A, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to help support you in any way that I can. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Rona.
Okay, thanks, Josh. One of the questions that came in as you were doing your overview is you spoke about A3 and different types of reports. Can you further define that and give some examples of that type of information reporting?
Sure. So we'll just go back to the slide here. So the reason it's called an A3 is it came out of the lean Toyota production system methodology, and a 11 by 17 sheet of paper in Europe is called an A3. I mean, it's an equivalent size. So an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper isn't large enough to fit all of this information on it, so it needs to be a little bit bigger, so that's where the name came from, the A3. In terms of what it is and how it's useful, again, the goal is to not have a 50-page report about what the problem was, what we did about it, and what the path forward is. We want to consolidate all of that rigorous analysis and research into a executive summary, if you will. So an A3, as this example shows, should be visual. It should show the picture as far as what is our current situation, why is that bad, that's the business case, what is the result of our analysis in the bottom left, what is our target condition, where do we want to be, and then what is the improvement activities, how are we going to get there. So if I had a pump failure that shut down a whole processing line that cost us $1 million over the course of a week, that's the business case. And the current situation, the RCA analysis would show that it was because of poor alignment or no training, those types of things. The target condition would be a mean time between failure for that pump of 5 years or more with a trained and knowledgeable workforce. Our improvement activities with all the things that we're doing in order to make that target situation realized. The schedule would be when that's going to happen, and the metrics are things, what are we looking at to ensure that the RCA and the actions that I'm putting in place are going to be effective. And if you want some actual examples, you can send me an email, and I can send you some that go into more detail, and we can have some correspondence there.
Great. And we have about...
Any other questions?
Yes, a few more have come in. We had, this person was asking, they must have been one of the 31%, Josh, that doesn't have an RCA program at all. What do you suggest as a starting point when you have no program at all?
Okay, so that's a great question as well. So again, if we go to our top 6 here, there needs to be an understanding and awareness throughout the organization for why an RCA program is effective. And I have a whole bunch of data in terms of improvement to OEE and asset utilization and things like that for how you have that continuous improvement cycle. You want to identify and eliminate failures, right? So the first thing that I would do is get your boss on board. And how do you do that, right? So you have to have data to support your claim. So whether or not there's data, again, we can go off on a lot of different tangents, but the goal is to create the picture that says, last year we had this many number of failures that resulted into this much lost production, or this much downtime, or this many dollars in equipment failures, and all of that is probably a big number. You can Pareto out those issues, figure out where your heavy hitters are, and focus on, saying, okay, so out of all of these issues, 80% of it was because of this one asset giving us problems. And if we had an effective RCA program in place, a loss and elimination program to address those issues, then we can cut that number in half. Something to that effect. So you want data to help drive your decision making. Get your boss on board and develop a plan for how do we put a program in place. But it all starts with data. Money talks, as we say.
That's interesting, and certainly probably some of that data, since many of the people here have a CMMS, that might be a good place to start looking for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, how we utilize our CMMS, whether or not we even have one. I know about a third of the respondents say that they don't currently have one in place. So how do we get the data that we need to make informed decisions? And if that's where we are in our organization, then we need to take a step back and ask ourselves the question, do we need a CMMS to actively and effectively manage our asset base? And I would argue that the answer to that question is yes.
And also, Josh, for the other 36% that says they have an informal problem-solving culture but not a formal RCA process. Next steps for that group as well?
Sure. And so oftentimes the challenges that we see is how do we make something sustainable? And again, you can read a book about reliability engineering and loss elimination and say, hey, a root cause analysis program is important, and so we'll put one in place, kind of an ad hoc way, but without having that close the gap loop, without having a defined RCA process, it's very difficult to make that sustainable. So when we look at one of the first things that we need to do is create awareness within the organization of why an RCA program is important, and then build a process that defines roles and responsibilities for this is how the RCA process will come together. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We build that with a cross-functional team, maybe with some outside help and expertise, and then we clearly define the roles and responsibilities for every individual. So what does operations do? How do they support it? What does the reliability group do? How do they support it? So once you define those things and have them in place, you can then begin to hold people accountable to making sure that they do the things that are expected of them. And how do we do that? It goes back to this piece here, which says we need an active and visible executive sponsorship and engagement from our middle management. So we need our bosses to be empowered to allow us to stick to the process. And they need to be empowered through their executive sponsorship that says this is the vision, this is where we want to be 6 months, 1 year, 5 years from now.
Great. Okay, and if anyone has additional questions, don't hesitate to type them in the question feature, and I'll try my best to get as many of them to Josh before the presentation is over. And Josh, you mentioned that there is an RCA tool guide that you're going to be sharing with the group. Can you explain a little more about what's going to be contained in that tool guide?
Absolutely. So that's available from our website at lce.com, or you guys can shoot me an email specifically asking for it. And what it does is it breaks down in a matrix format the 7 or 8, as we consider them, to the most reasonable and effective RCA tools. And some of those are, so 5 Whys, a very simple one, which is great to get people on board, but there's much more rigorous RCA tools out there, things like design versus application review, controlled charting, cause and analysis, so, fishbone diagrams, things of that nature, FMEA, things of that nature, and the tool itself lists the different RCA tools, says when the tool is applicable for what situations, who should use it. It has a few different columns for when it's applicable, what is the best instance to apply this tool, and things of that nature. So it's a great reference to, especially for those of us that are early in our root cause analysis careers, to be able to understand, okay, so here's the failure, what tool, when we get to the analyze part of our domain process, what tool do I use to effectively perform this RCA investigation? And just like anything else, you have to know what tool to use for the job. So not everything requires a hammer. Sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a fork truck. It just depends what you're trying to do.
Okay, and you had also mentioned, Josh, that earlier in our polls we noted that we have people from a variety of different industries on the line with us today, and the process that you're outlining, you've also had background in a variety of industries. Is root cause analysis, are there differences when you're in processing versus a utility company versus mining, versus a discrete manufacturing? What might be some of the differences in root cause analysis process or triggers, or is this really a universal process that you've outlined today?
That's another great question. So again, what the process is and how it looks is going to be specific for the site that you're at. It depends on how many resources you have, whether that number is where it needs to be or not, and what roles you have defined within the facility, whether that's a five days a week, 2-shift model facility, or a 7 days a week, 24-hour a day facility. those specifics impact hows and the whats. In terms of the overall industry perspective, the process really is similar regardless. What will change is your trigger, right? So if I'm in pharmaceuticals, I very quickly get to batch sizes of vaccines that are over $1 million. So if I have a trigger set at $200,000 event needing an RCA, I'm going to be inundated with many different RCAs. Whereas if I'm in maybe steel manufacturing or in a coke mill, for example, it may be a lot harder and more difficult for me to hit that $200,000 threshold. So really, it's in our establishment of when we set or where we set those RCA thresholds, and that will vary quite a bit by industry. But in terms of how you perform the analysis, who should be involved, those types of things, that's pretty standard throughout. You want a trained reliability engineer leading the analysis. You want a cross-functional team of operators, mechanics, technical people, experts, subject matter experts, etc., involved in the RCA process. You want to have action plans and A3 reporting. You want to have a visual management in place to understand where you've been and where you're going. You want to be able to effectively manage your action items to make sure that they're getting addressed. All those things will be identical regardless of the industry that you're in.
And as far as the makeup of a successful team, because as you indicated, there's a technical side, there's a people side, what do you see as at least the minimum number of the key players and their roles in comprising a successful RCA team?
Okay, great. So again, this is a generic process map, if you will, for RCA triggers. And it doesn't get into the level of detail of differentiating between maybe a level 1, 2, or 3 or level A, B, or C RCA. And I think that's an important distinction here. Whereas if something is a safety incident or a $200,000 or a $2 million impact, or if I lose a critical system for a week, those are very high-level, rigorous engineering analysis and RCAs are required. So that would be a level A. Whereas a level C on the opposite side of the spectrum would be maybe a controller that's malfunctioning, that's more of a nuisance, but it happens 5 times a week. So it's always causing me, 5-10 minutes of downtime here and there. So depending on the level of analysis, or the level of the incident and the failure, whether it be A, B, or C level, that really dictates the makeup of the team. So a level C may be just an operator or mechanic on the floor in a 5Y exercise, troubleshooting just then and there, whereas a level A is a more rigorous study that takes a few weeks, if not a month or two to complete, that involves a facilitator, perhaps the OEM is involved, the equipment designer, the engineering group, the operations group, representatives from the maintenance group. You really need to get down to the level of detail of what happened, why did it happen, what was the machine doing, what is the machine supposed to be doing, all of those types of questions. And a more rigorous approach and more involved team needs to be assembled for that event or for that instance.
Okay, that's very helpful. And lastly, Josh, do you find that, we've had several people ask about the slides, if they will be available. And Josh has agreed to send all of our attendees today a PDF of the presentation. We'll do that. We'll ask a question at the end, a little survey question, ask if you'd like to receive the slides, and he'll be happy to send them to you. And before we close, Josh, can you also let us know, there's so many aspects to root cause analysis, and you really focused on the people side today in the tools. When you're asked to come in and help organizations with this process, what other aspects do you and your organization get involved with to help clients be successful?
Absolutely. So again, if you think of any initiative as having a either three legs of the triangle or three legs of a stool. There's a project management side, a change management side, and a leadership side as well. So you need all three of those aspects to be successful. So the change management side we talked about quite a bit today, which involves having the leadership and executive sponsorship and funding and resources, those types of things. What we did not touch on is the project management side and how you actually execute. And again, you need a process in place. The DMAIC process is a great problem-solving methodology to follow. It's very easy to understand, but difficult to execute. The analyze piece alone is where the RCA gets performed. And if you've never performed an RCA before, they can be pretty challenging and daunting exercises, and you want to make sure that your analysis is exhaustive. So, I mean, again, we offer lots of resources. We have, again, if you go to our website, lce.com, we offer a 3-day RCA course. It goes into a lot of detail for all the different tools that are out there, which ones are most effective in what situations. We offer courses that can be performed on site that we can tailor to your specific client needs. We have a lot of reference material on our website. You can reach out to me with specific questions. And again, I would urge those of us that are on today's webinar to not feel like you're alone, that a lot of this stuff has been thought through before in the past, and there's a lot of information and resources out there with subject matter experts like myself that have been in the trenches performing root cause analysis and problem-solving methodologies for, decades now. So reach out to organizations like SMRP, like ourselves, that have these kind of tools out there, and it shortens that learning curve quite a bit.
Great. Okay, good advice. Well, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank Josh Rothenberg and Lifecycle Engineering for putting together this presentation and helping focus on one very important aspect that's often overlooked in root cause analysis. And I'd also like to thank everybody who was on the line with us today for participating. And this is going to conclude the webinar. And my hope is when I end it, there will be a very brief survey. And both Josh and I will really appreciate the feedback. And, we try to bring you guest speakers on topics that are of interest to you. And Josh has a wealth of information. And if there's other topics that you'd really like us to focus on, we're happy to do so. So thanks, Josh, for putting this together. And we hope we'll see you again. And thanks to everybody for joining us today.
All right, thanks a lot.
Have a great day.